Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader reading books for you. Today I will be reading Chapter 8 from The Moon and the Magic Box by Michael Ross, illustrated by Magdalena Adic. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Chapter 8 The Dreaded Dammers Arrive. Dammers have been around since the beginning of time. They are despicable and cruel. There is a darkness about them that makes the hairs on your arms stand on end and makes you want to scream at the top of your voice. The first hint that they are around is that the air temperature drops drastically, even on a warm summer's day. If you suddenly feel freezing and can see your breath, watch out. They are very difficult to find, observe, and describe. The majority of those that have tried have sadly been discovered and have lost their lives instantly. No ifs or buts. The Dammers are the oldest and, unfortunately, most notorious of the species that may be found in the cosmos. They didn't start off being called the Dammers. Their original name was the Morgue-Umist, and they were assassins of the worst kind. They had a spiritual leader who was ruthless in organizing kidnapping and assassination contracts. Only we on Earth have money, but within the broader context of the cosmos, it is a question of favors for favors or valuable cordoglio crystals. In other words, the Morgue-Umist would be contacted to organize an assassination. In return, they would require something, anything that would boost their notoriety within the cosmos, together with the universal and valuable cordoglio diamonds, much larger than the ones on Earth and infinitely purer. They also had inherent magical properties that made them all that more valuable, and could offer a limitless supply of energy to any space-traveling craft. 4 million years ago, there was some severe infighting within the hierarchy of the Morgue-Umist. The new usurper to the throne put an assassination contract out on the incumbent, and a new leader was in place. However, to place a contract on one of your kind didn't go down well within the Morgue-Umist community. In the rules of sanctity, they added a new rule: never, ever place a contract on another member of the Morgue-Umist. From that moment, the new spiritual leader changed the name from the Morgue-Umist to the Dammers for two reasons. One was that, as the all-powerful leader, he could, and secondly, he thought the name had a better, more notorious ring. A Dammer is tall, at least 7 foot tall. They don't walk, they float. They couldn't walk even if they wanted to because they don't have legs. Their ability to float and move around as such is now a part of their genetic makeup. You would never in a million years be able to tell one Dammer from another. They all look identical. They all wear flowing black, all-in-one cape with hoods. The material is practically shredded and in tatters. The only Dammer you can see is the spiritual leader whose title is Morg Umengle. Now he is tiny, just over 3 foot high. He carries a multicolored magical staff. He also wears a cape with a hood, but this is resplendent and covered in brightly colored feathers of the Crandally bird found on planet Crandally, just to the left of Alpha Centauri. Even though you can only just see his face, you can tell he has never smiled once in his life. He has oval-shaped yellow piercing eyes that look powerful enough to cut through a block of stone. You will never see the face of an ordinary dammer, though, until just before your spirit is sucked out of your body. The other indication that dammers are around can only be described as a disgusting smell of boiling sprouts and cabbage, and sometimes cow poo. Some will say the reason why the majority of human children don't like eating sprouts is a buried memory of the smell of dammers from a long time ago when we first came into existence. It seems to be tied in somehow within ourselves and evolution. Very few individuals from various species have survived to report on how the dammers work when on a mission, but this is the most conclusive observation so far. First of all, the dammers will invariably find the object that they are seeking, whether they be human or any other species for that matter, using information from off-world lowlifes, whose sole purpose is to keep their ear to the ground and report anything unusual. It is a very efficient informant system that will only work for the morgue you missed. The dammers never work alone. They work in packs. More than anything, this is to confuse their target. They can materialize out of thin air. Once they do, they float around very quickly in ever-decreasing circles around their goal, until, without warning, a designated dammer will make a connection that comes from the space under its hood and the target's heart, and begins to suck out the spirit or soul. The whole process will only take 10 minutes at the most. It culminates in the victim collapsing to the ground, devoid of any life. No resuscitation can replace the spirit or soul that has been removed. It is the end of life for that being. The dammers then collect together in celebration and rush back to their secret base. It has never been confirmed, but the best rumor is that it is situated throughout a myriad of complex tunnels and catacombs under a very active volcano in the primordial dimension many light years away from Earth. One final aspect of the dammers is known. If the object of their contract is removed, or something else crops up to divert their attention, they will forget who they are looking for. It is very similar to the way a rhinoceros works on our planet. If one charges at you, and at the last minute, you were able to hide behind a tree, as the rhinoceros charges past and suddenly can't see you, it will forget why it was charging in the first place and simply give up. Armed with this knowledge, the fact that the dammers were actively trying to steal the valuable crystals from the moon, which they had done, they were now on a mission to find Pangy's homeworld, where they could steal a plentiful supply of magic crystals that they desperately want in their possession. Already they had been offered unbelievable favors from other species in other dimensions for a crystal or two. A lot was at stake here for the Dammers. So the spiritual leader had ordered nearly all available Dammers to seek out the crystals and steal them, and woe betide anyone who got in their way. Pengy knew it would only be a question of time before the Dammers realized the coordinates to his homeworld that were embedded in Troy's brain. The Dammers had already pursued all the other members of his family inside the moon. Luckily, because no one knew the homeworld coordinates, they were left alone. Removing the spirit or soul of an individual didn't come without its price for the Dammers. It took a tremendous amount of energy and resources to remove a spirit. So logically, there was no point in removing the spirits of Pangy's family if they didn't have the coordinates. But, as we know, Troy did have all those mathematical coordinates in his head. Troy now knew this, and so did Pangy, which is why Pangy came up with the idea of lending Troy the wand to cloak himself in invisibility. If the Dammers had got the scent and started tracking Troy, all Troy would need to do, even at the very last minute, would be to initiate the invisibility cloak. The Dammers would rush past, having no idea where Troy was, why they were chasing him, and would need to regroup and start again. It was around 11 in the morning the next day that Troy and Desme were chatting with Pengy in Troy's bedroom. Nesbit was happily lying on Troy's duvet, resting his head on his outstretched paws, and seemed to be listening to every word that was being said. Glynis was out for a few hours visiting a friend. She would stay with her friend for lunch. Because of lunch, a few hours would invariably turn into half a day. So Troy knew they wouldn't be disturbed for a while. They were discussing what to do when the Dammers came. What to do if that idiot from the army turned up again, as Troy would describe him, and how exactly, when the time was right, all the homeworld coordinates would be removed from his head and back into the hands of Pengy. It all seemed pretty straightforward, but for his age, Troy had a wise head on his shoulders. He knew that life or luck or even karma could upset the smooth running of any plans. So Troy, for one, was a little cautious most of the time. If everything was running too well, he would be ready if something were to go wrong. He wasn't anxious at all, just in a state of mild preparedness, as he liked to call it. Once they had finished, Troy, Desme, and Nesbit went downstairs to grab a bite to eat. Pangy said he had a meeting arranged inside the magic box with some of his family from the moon. Troy, Desme, and Nesbit had only been downstairs for around 10 minutes when Troy suddenly started holding his head in his hands. "What is the matter, Troy?" wondered Desme. "Is your head hurting again?" "Well, sort of," replied Troy. "It was a message saying to me, 'Come now, right away, need to see you.' And it keeps repeating. It is doing it again now." Desme was beside herself. She didn't know how to help Troy, but suddenly an idea came into her head, and she said to Troy, "Is it a voice you recognize?" At first, Troy dismissed the idea by saying, "No, of course not. It is no one that I—" "Hang on! Yes, I do recognize it. It is Pangy's voice. I can't believe I hadn't noticed his fake Arnold Schwarzenegger accent. They shot upstairs, and there, standing and bouncing up and down on Troy's bed, was Panky. His eyes were out on their stalks, and he looked worried. The huge, toothy smile he typically had fixed in place, where his mouth should have been. It was a sad-looking mouth now, the corners turned down, and as soon as he saw Troy, he started shouting out, "Danger, yeah, plenty danger. Need to hide, puny body now. De dammers is on their way. Lots of danger. Take one now. Dammers will come for me first. But because they will be able tell no maps in my brains, they not take my spirit away. But they know about you now, so yeah, you need to run and hide. Use wand like I have shown you to make invisibility cloak and keep very quiet." Troy grabbed the wand, which was lying at Panky's feet, and then he and Desme, with Nesbit just behind, turned to go downstairs and make their way to the barn when Panky shouted after them, "Remember, try use invisibility cloak at last minute. That way, the stupid dammers then can't see you and then don't know why they chasing after you. Please remember, so important, yeah?" Troy managed to nod vigorously as he came to the top of the stairs, and they all shot down. Panky leaped off the bed, fell flat on his face, picked himself up, and made his way to the box and disappeared inside. Sure enough, it must have been 10 minutes later when curiosity got the better of Panky, and he popped his head out of the box, only to come face to face with two of the dammers. It was too late to get back inside the box now, and the dammers could drag the rest of Panky out. They had placed him on the ground and began swirling around him. He could feel them investigating his mind. What was most frightening was that they would never say a word. There was absolute silence, except for the swish of their tattered cloaks as they came near to Panky. Panky didn't like anybody or anything poking around in his mind, but there was nothing he could do to prevent them from doing it. After a few moments, the dammers collected as a group. There must have been several of them. They were interlinking between each other, obviously in deep telepathic conversation. Suddenly, they stopped, lined up in front of Panky, as if they were taking a good long glass look at him. Then one by one, the dammers leapt, taking it in turns to shoot through Troy's open bedroom window. As the last one leapt, Panky decided to levitate to the window. He didn't want to fall flat on his face again, and cautiously looked out, and could see the dammers collecting as a group again in the farmyard, seemingly looking around as if searching for something, then shot off as one to the main barn. Panky drew in a big breath. He called on his ancestors to keep Troy, Desme, and Nesbit safe, levitated up and onto Troy's duvet, and waited. If he had fingers, now would be the time he would have kept them crossed for luck. Troy, Desme, and Nesbit had entered the barn and quickly made their way into one of the horse stables. The one that Troy picked, he picked on purpose, because it held his prize horse, which was called Samson. Samson was huge, a breed of horse called a Shire horse. He was a beautiful gray color, and his coat had a lovely sheen about it. He had the trademark hairy hooves, but best of all, he was very tall, even for a shire, standing just over 7 foot tall at the shoulders. To everyone else, except Troy, he was a formidable sight to come across. People would move out of the way. His rear end was unbelievably wide, and Troy would whisper to Samson as he was on his back, stroking him affectionately behind the ears. "How you doing, big bum?" Troy was convinced Samson could understand because he always either snorted, whinnied, or grunted and stamped one or two of his hooves. Because Samson was so big, he was fearless, and nothing had yet fazed him in any way. And it was this attribute that Troy was relying on in case the Dammers paid a visit. Samson was quite happy standing in his open stable, slowly grinding away at the loose hay in the feeder. Desme's eyes were watering a little. Samson's urine had powerful, strong, pungent odor to it. It was amusing to Troy and Desme watching Samson's reaction to Nesbit in his stable. He was forever turning his head around and down to Nesbit, snorting at him as if to say, "Now you behave in my stable, mate, or you will be for it." Nesbit quite understood what the snorting meant as well, so he squashed himself into the furthest corner of the stable. Troy had hauled in an unopened bale of hay into the corner that Nesbit was in. They sat on it and waited. They didn't have to wait for very long. Troy was whispering to Desme about the wand he now held in his hands, and what Pengy had told him to do to initiate the invisibility cloak. It was straightforward. All Troy had to do was think of an ample cloak covering himself, Desme, and Nesbit. The wand would do the rest. Pengy had told him that they could see out, although it would be a little hazy. But the Dammers would not see them. While Troy was describing the last instructions of Pengy, he suddenly started to shiver, and so did Desme. They could both see their breath, which was coming out in great billowing clouds of white mist. They both knew right away that the Dammers must be very close. Then the damp smell of boiling sprouts and cabbage hit them full on. It was enough to make Desme retch a little. Troy dragged the top of his t-shirt over his nose, and he screwed his eyes up. Nesbit seemed utterly unaffected by the smell, and he continued to keep a wary eye on Samson. Troy couldn't believe how cold it was becoming. He very carefully started to stand up enough to look over the edge of the low stable partition. He thought. I can't see anything towards the back of the stable. So he twisted his body a little to face the barn doors. Suddenly, there they all were, all of the Dammers, hovering just inside the barn doors. They appeared to be sniffing the air. Then, as one, they all seemed to spot Troy's head poking over the partition and started to move towards him. Desme grabbed onto Troy's leg. Nesbit came up very close to them. As now, Troy held the wand in front of him. He closed his eyes and concentrated. He was very anxious that he may run out of time to initiate the cloak before the Dammers reached him. It was undoubtedly going to be touch and go. But at the last second, Troy, Desme, and Nesbit felt themselves under the lightest of see-through materials. the wand was glowing a very bright purple in Troy's hand. For Troy, Desme, and Nesbit, the freezing temperature had gone, and now it was lovely and warm. They kept very still. As soon as the cloak enveloped them, they saw the barrage of Dammers come shooting over the partition wall, absolutely convinced that they would come across Troy. But there was nothing there. They were totally confused now and were circling each other, wondering for what and why they were there. Troy could imagine the Dammers as one, mentally scratching their heads, totally at a loss. The Dammers didn't take into consideration the huge bulk of Samson that had been as quiet as a mouse, but now had reared up and was neighing at the top of his voice. Troy and Desme could see this had startled the Dammers. Nothing usually surprises them, who shot towards each other and seemed to make a group decision. And, as one, they shot out of the barn at breakneck speed and out of sight. Troy whispered to Desme that it would be a good idea to wait for 5 minutes before they emerged from the invisibility cloak. As he said this, he suddenly realized that Pangy had given him full instructions to cover themselves with the cloak, but not to reverse the action. Troy tried standing and walking out of it, but no way was that going to happen. He tried concentrating and imagining himself uncloaked. No, that didn't work. He tried maneuvering himself under the edge of the cloak, where it met the ground. Nope, it was Desme who came up with the bright idea of asking Pangy. So, as a group, they tried walking out of Samson's stable, and that worked. So they made their way out of the barn, in through the kitchen, and up the stairs to Troy's bedroom. It took ages, of course, because they all had to move in a tightly knit group. But manage it they did, and eventually they moved into Troy's bedroom, and there on Troy's bed was Pangy. Thank goodness, thought Troy. Let's get out from under this cloak. So Troy said to Pangy, Pangy, we made it, but I don't know how to reverse the invisibility cloak. What do I have to do? But Pangy seemed as if either he wasn't listening or was preoccupied with something else. So Troy said a little louder, Pangy, are you listening to me? We need to get out from under the cloak. Pangy, Pangy? But still, Pangy wasn't responding. Troy turned to Desme and remarked, What's wrong with him, Desme? Why isn't he listening? Desme had a little knowing smile on her lips, and she softly said to Troy, Have you thought that maybe he couldn't hear us because of the cloak? It probably shields any noise we make, as well as providing the invisibility. Troy had to admit that once again, Desme was probably right. So, what could they do to get Pangy's attention? Troy told Desme that if they made their way to his desk, maybe they could push the table a little, pushing the pile of papers Troy had on the edge onto the floor. It was worth a try, so they inched over to the table, and Troy placed his hands on the inside of the cloak, which was now against the table, and he pushed with all his might. It was probably too hard, because not only did his papers tumble onto the floor, but so did his table lamp and a tall box holding rulers and pens, etc. Now, this did get Pangy's attention, who levitated off the bed and stood peering first at the papers and pens and lamp on the floor, then directly into the cloak. His eyes came out on their stalks, and he appeared to be thinking, then suddenly seemed to clap. He turned around, reached into the box, and brought out what looked like a medical stethoscope. One end he slipped into the corner of his big toothy smile. The other looked like it had a little red sucker on it, and he thrust it onto the outside wall of the invisibility cloak. Pangy's voice suddenly reverberated around inside the cloak. "Ah, so gut. You come back to Pangy. Damn good job, yeah? But why you silly still in cloak?" "Because," snapped Troy, "you didn't tell me how to reverse the invisibility cloak." "Oh, ha, ha. Silly me, yeah? Very simple. See their little purplish button on wand on one side? Press it down twice. Cloak go away." Troy looked at the wand, and sure enough, there was a little purplish button, and he did press it twice, and in an instant the cloak was gone. Troy just stood there and glared at Pangy, who could sense that Troy wasn't happy with him. Desmi, on the other hand, was inwardly giggling at the situation, and when Pangy turned his attention to Desmi and picked up her vibes, he started his wild chipmunk-like laughing. This made Troy scowl even more, but he couldn't keep that going for long, and before he realized it, he was laughing as well. When they had all settled down, they began to appreciate the seriousness of what had happened when they encountered the Dammers. They then began to discuss what they needed to do next. Pangy said right away that they needed to lay low to try to put the Dammers off the scent. So the rule of thumb was act as normal. Pangy suggested that Troy and Desmi maybe meet up with their friends they saw the other day. Pangy said the Dammers would be back keeping a secretive eye on Troy, but if he were acting as any human boy would be doing during school holidays, it wouldn't raise their suspicions. It would take the Dammers a few days to figure out who they were looking for before they would be back on the case. Troy was breathing a mental sigh of relief. With Desmi and his pals, some quality time would be just the thing to help get his mind off everything. That was it, then. A couple of days having fun. Pangy was safe, the Dammers out of sight and mind for a while. Troy was already beginning to relax, and after chatting with Desmi, tomorrow they would have a picnic together. Desmi was on the phone already. She had spoken to Slurpee, Jello, and Bragger, and arranged to meet under the old oak tree, not far from Bramblewood, tomorrow mid-morning. Troy relaxed some more. No need to be on edge for a couple of days. Time for a little fun. He couldn't wait till tomorrow. Tomorrow would be a good day. No Dammers, no visit by those army idiots. Or so he thought. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for Chapter 9. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.